Hi, I'm Rain.
And I'm Katie.
And together we're Wicked Rain Studio. Today we're going to do a little video on what it is that we do and how we got here. And I thought our job is pretty cool.
We have a pretty interesting job.
So we thought we'd answer a few questions about what it's like to be a costume professional and how you could be one too.
And people who are interested in this field and like, how do we get there? Because that's not always clear. This is a little more obscure as far as how to get here.
So Katie, why are you in costumes?
So this is a little bit of a story because my background was originally in art. I had taken a lot of art classes as a kid. I was always in art club in high school. I planned to go into animation. And when I got to college, I had never sewn before. So I wanted to take an intro to sewing class because more crafty abilities is what I enjoy. And so I took an intro to sewing and it was in the theater department. And part of it was working on a show, and I learned that costume design was a career, and I hadn't known that before. And I thought that was really cool. I enjoyed sewing, and the rest was history. And how about you? How did you get into this job? Because I know you had a different path than
Yeah, my path is from the perspective of I always grew up making my own Halloween costumes with my mom. They were terrible, but adorable. In high school, I really got into cosplay, and I cosplayed from Sailor Moon and all those other fun things. I had also been in theater, but I knew I didn't want to be an actor. I don't really like being on stage. I'm not. Surprise. Looking at the program for theater at the college I was going to go to, and I saw that they had a costume design program, and it was like a light bulb went off. Yep. And so that's actually where we met, met in college, in two completely different paths to get to the same place.
Can you describe your typical day?
So we'll start with mine. I'm in the position of what's called a stitcher, and so my job almost all day is sitting at a sewing machine and sewing things. I work in a shop that deals with a lot of different shows, and we will have a whole rack of costumes that need to be worked on, and each costume has a list of things that has to happen. So they're all in order of due date. So I go, I pick something off the rack, I read what needs to be done to it. Sometimes it's adding a snap, sometimes it's take this thing completely apart and put it back together. Some projects take an hour or two, some take a week. It really is a nice variety of different things that I work with every day. And then as soon as it's done, I sign off on it to say that I've done it, and then it goes through a quality control. And so someone else in my team looks at the notes and just makes sure that it's done correctly. Katie, you work on one show.
I do. I currently work on I guess you could say, a stationary show. It's been here in Vegas for several years. It's not planning to go anywhere. So the costumes have been designed, they've been made, and we get regular new ones in, but my main job is actually just maintaining those costumes. There are acrobatics in our show, and so they tear those costumes a lot. I come in every day and I go through all the racks of all the costumes. We have several hundred costumes that I go through every day, and I run my hands through them, check them, and just make sure if any tears, if any snaps have come off. I spend my day sitting at a sewing machine and just fixing everything that got torn apart the day before, and that's a repetitive thing for me. Before I was this, I was actually a dresser, which I think in the field is, like in other theaters, is it still called a dresser?
Yeah, or attendant. Either
yeah.
A dresser or a costume attendant. Those
Yes.
are kind of the two job titles you might hear.
Yeah, and so I was a dresser, and so for that position, and that's a pretty common entry position for a lot of theaters and a lot of shows, and it's a good job to look for if you don't have a lot of sewing experience yet, because a lot of theaters need people to just help other people get dressed, especially when you have quick changes, when someone needs to quickly run off the stage, get dressed in something, and get back on stage. They need someone helping them there to get that done in a very fast manner.
Some other responsibilities that dressers have is also just making sure that every actor has the costume they need that night. Sometimes, some places you'll be assigned an actor, some places you'll be assigned a dressing room. Just kind of making sure at the beginning of the night, at the end of the night, that all the costumes are there. And then they're also in charge of laundry, which is the thankless part of our field.
The part that everyone thinks of when they think of a dresser, but it actually only makes up
It's a small part of the night,
portion.
but it is important because no one likes to wear a dirty clothing ever.
Nope, and no one wants their clothing shrunk, so you gotta know exactly how all those costumes need to be washed.
How many different types of jobs are there in your field of work? Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about what it is to be a designer?
Yeah, so when I originally went to college, I did mostly go for design. Not using it as much, but the designer's job is to come in at the creation of a show, and they're going to read through the script and work with the director on what direction they want this show to be. Like, do they want it inspired by Game of Thrones? Do they want it in, like, specifically time period? Do they want it to be set in an 80s nightclub? Like, you know, there's all kinds of weird ideas that, you know, usually come from the director, and that designer's job is to go through the script, make note of every costume piece that needs to happen, when changes need to happen, and they design every costume. Sometimes that means drawing out the costume, which is where my art background came in, and it means drawing out each character and each costume change. Sometimes it means creating a mood board and really just putting together, like, this is the vibe that this character is gonna have.
And then essentially with that, you're then like shopping for that character's wardrobe.
When they start going into tech for a show, the designer is there to watch things on stage. If something's not working, you know, they're there to be like, okay, I'm gonna find something else for this, talk with the director. Like, they're really the go-to person for the director to talk to make changes.
Some other training that I've had is in costume shop management. And so the shop manager is the person who's in charge of everyone who's physically making things, right? So the shop manager and the designer will work together to kind of help decide. The designer will say, I really want this gorgeous ball gown. And the shop manager goes, okay, that's going to take 40 hours to make, so you can only get this ball gown. Or if you can find one, we'll alter it. And so that's a conversation that the shop manager and the designer will have together. But ultimately, the final look is all determined by the designer. Other jobs that you would find in a costume shop are sometimes there's someone who's a shopper. And so their job is to buy everything that the shop needs, whether that's clothing for the designer to approve, or thread and snaps and anything in between. Draper, who is someone who makes the patterns and also runs a team. You have a first hand, which is a draper's assistant. They are in charge of cutting out fabric and also keeping track of all the notes that the team needs to have. The costume designers will often have assistants.
Larger productions, you've got assistants under assistants.
Yes,
You know?
yes. If you're like a big,
Like, we're talking
fancy,
Hollywood.
yeah. Or if you're a costume designer on Broadway, you might have more than one show at a time.
Yeah.
And then you might have assistant designers and then even associate designers.
Things that aren't necessarily in this theater field, but
Yes.
also relate.
Yes.
That you could, with this education, possibly pursue. Stylists for magazines, commercials, someone to be told, okay, this is what we want the look to be, and they go shopping at department stores, or they go shopping through whatever the
Wardrobe
like
they have.
particular designer it is, and they put together a look with that, and often with props and other things like that. That was
Yes.
actually my sister's job.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot she did that.
Yeah. Another field that has dressers are musicians. All musicians usually have a team of dressers that follow them with their costumes, and their job is to make sure the costumes are maintained and make sure those costumes are where they need to be when they need to be.
You better believe Lady Gaga has a team of dressers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Things like a costume historian. I have a friend that has her undergraduate degree in theater and costuming, but then she went on to get a master's degree in museum studies. And so her entire focus is to be a museum curator for historical fashion. And a lot of times at those museums, they have entire teams that do things that are like restoration but for clothing. So you might take apart a garment and put some like stronger fabric behind it to make it last longer, but you're still trying to keep it within its authentic origins. And so that's like, I've never done it. I've seen videos. It looks really cool.
Looks so cool.
Is your job mainly physical strain, mental strain, or both?
let's say mainly physical.
It tends to be a physical job.
And mostly in the same way of an office worker, where you're sitting or standing in one position for long periods of time.
So one thing that I regularly do to try to fight the physical strain that sometimes happens is I try to split up my day so I'm not constantly sitting like this, like a gremlin. At the sewing machine. I try to remember to like sit up, to like make sure that my posture is good. It's not as physically demanding as like a heavy weightlifting sort of job, but as a dresser, there's also some physical demand.
There's physical demand because you are carrying costumes around a theater, and those costumes can get heavy. Like, you layer those on top of each other, and eventually they get really heavy. And I would also say the one thing kind of specific to costume shops that would be a mental strain is they're often put in the basement. And
so
you
true.
will spend long hours without ever seeing the sunlight.
Which is why Katie's studio has so much nice natural light. It's beautiful working here.
So can you live and work anywhere in the world, or can your job be done only in certain places?
It's a mix of both.
Yeah, because there are theaters kind of all over the world.
Perhaps there is a really strong regional theater in a medium-sized or smaller city throughout the country. But they usually have a shop of maybe 4 or 5 people at most, and a lot of times those people really like their jobs.
Yeah, and
I don't blame them.
themselves, you know.
So it's hard to get a job opening there.
Yeah.
But there's also more than just New York and LA.
Yes, absolutely. We live in Las Vegas, which has a lot of shows as well.
Huge entertainment city. There's also Chicago has a lot of theater. Washington, D.C. is a big one.
Minnesota actually has a lot of theater.
If you're willing to tour,
Yes.
that's actually a really exciting thing.
Yes.
Because a lot of times if you're on tour, you're doing a mix of the job of a dresser and a stitcher. Because you're helping them get in and out of costumes at night, but then you're also doing repairs to keep the costumes going, and depending on what you're needed at each location could be different.
Absolutely.
And so that's a really cool way to see the world.
It really is.
Is to get on a tour. We have a friend that's on a tour right now, and she's always sending pictures from London and Mexico, and you're like, that's so cool.
Yeah. Are there any limitations on your personal and or social life because of the nature of your work?
Yes.
Yes. Well, if you're touring, you're definitely never stationed in one particular town. Your family basically becomes who you're touring with, so you better hope that
You like them.
But also, it's a very odd hour kind of job, especially if you're a dresser. When I was working as a dresser, I worked from 4 to midnight. Was my typical shift because I had to be there during the show. And if you've ever gone to see a show, people go in the evening.
People go see shows at night. It also often means that you're working holidays.
Yes.
People like to go see a show on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's real popular.
Especially in this town.
In Vegas, it's
a lot of
real
people
popular.
come to Vegas for the holidays. What classes should I take in high school or college?
There's some of the obvious ones where it's like if you have a sewing class that you can take.
Absolutely.
Then I highly recommend taking theater in high school so that you have a background of it, and art classes for sure.
If you can go into an admission program for a theater department and show that you're artistic, that you know how to draw, that it goes a long way.
Some things that you might not expect that are really good are history classes.
Yes.
If you're doing a show and the director comes up to you and says, hey, I want this set in Russia in the early 1900s, like, it helps to know that you're talking about the Nicholas and Alexandria time. Like, it helps to know that.
Yeah.
Because then you have something to start with. And then it's also useful because if you're taking history classes, then you're learning how to research. And
Absolutely.
And being, like, having the knowledge of how to research, then you learn, like, what sort of things do I search for? Where are there useful library tools? Art history specifically is almost essential.
Yeah, you pretty much need it.
Because if you're trying to figure out, all right, we're doing this Shakespeare play and they want it full Elizabethan, well, what did they wear? The only way we know is through paintings.
Yeah.
And so being able to know, like, oh, that time period is called the Baroque time period, and so I know to look up Baroque paintings, or that one is the Jacobean, and like what those words mean, and where to find those images.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about what to look for in a college program if you're interested in going into costume design or costume technology.
Yeah.
We both went to the University of Arizona for our bachelor's degrees.
Yep.
I highly recommend it.
It's a very good program.
It's a very good program.
And the teachers are amazing.
The one reason why I think it's a very good program is because it has both classes in costume design and classes in how to make things.
Which is not always the case.
Oh, there are some programs out there that focus exclusively on the designing side of things, and then you just kind of have to figure it out yourself for how to sew. And I know some very talented designers who went to programs like that.
Absolutely.
And they're all self-taught in sewing. But I feel like having a really strong base in how to sew really opens up your career options.
Yeah. You also learn how garments are constructed, which not only, again, expands your hireability, it also expands your understanding of a designer. Because there's definitely been times when a designer comes to me and like shows me a costume and I go, that's actually not physically possible. I don't want a seam here. Well, you have to have one there. Like, and so having that knowledge can be really helpful, even as a designer, expanding yourself in the field because you are seen as someone who's good to work with.
Some good questions to ask your potential program about are, can I see a list of the classes you offer? If they have any networking with local shows.
I went to grad school at the University of Minnesota, and we had a really cool program where in the evenings they would have 3-hour master classes where they would bring in professionals from the theater community, and they had the Guthrie Theater there, which is a really wonderful theater. They would teach us things like dyeing and painting, how to build corsets, classes on working with unusual materials, and costume prop making. And then, also wig and makeup.
Yes, wig and makeup. One last thing to really make sure to ask about, what are your alumni doing? And then you can see like, oh wow, people who have graduated from here now work at the Guthrie, or they work on Broadway, or they do film. If everyone who graduated from this school all works in film, and you're not interested in working in film, that's probably not the school for you.
Yeah.
But if that's what you want to do, then that's going to be great. So.
And there are certain schools that just have better connections in certain fields. I think we can wrap this up.
All right, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask us. If there's something you'd like to see more about, go ahead and comment.
Comment down below.
And subscribe.
Absolutely, that's what I was just about to say.
That one!
Subscribe!
Also, if you're interested, you can check out one of our other videos, including maybe the one about how to take measurements as a start on your costuming career.